Hello everyone, welcome back to Lostshrine. Tonight I'm taking you deep into the snowy hollows and quiet streets of Appalachian small towns to share 6 true creepy neighbor stories that unfold around Christmas. These aren't just ghost tales, they're unsettling encounters that mix everyday life with a sense of something off, lingering just beneath the surface. Each story will make you wonder what's really hiding behind familiar doors and quiet windows. Before we step into the first tale, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with anyone who loves a good shiver down the spine. I'd love to hear where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. I grew up knowing every face on our dead-end road, especially around Christmas. Back then, the hollow would light up with the warm glow of porch lanterns, the smell of wood smoke drifting through the air, and the quiet hum of families celebrating in their own way. Every house had its rhythm, the Millers trimming their tree while Christmas carols leaked from an old radio, the Thompsons stacking firewood in neat piles, the Hensleys carving their names into the snow each morning. You knew everyone, and everyone knew you. That's why it was impossible not to notice when a new man moved into the old Carson place that December. Nobody remembered seeing him before. Nobody had heard of him, and the house itself had always carried a kind of weight. Dark windows staring down the hollow like blind eyes. Unlike the other homes, his stayed dark, even when the snow piled high against the porch railings. The yard was never shoveled, never salted, never disturbed. But every night, I'd see him on that porch, standing so straight and still it was like a wooden statue, facing my house, watching, always watching. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just lonely, a man moved in from out of state, feeling isolated in the hollow during Christmas. But there was something wrong with him, something that didn't fit. Something subtle and small that made the hair on my neck rise. He never seemed to breathe. Not a puff of fog in the frigid air, not a rise or fall of his chest. Just a dark shape against the frost, unmoving and impossibly silent. I tried to tell myself it was imagination. After all, we live in a forested hollow where shadows can trick you, and the wind carries voices in strange ways. But the more I watched, the more impossible it became. One evening, after Christmas Eve dinner, I stepped outside to take the trash down to the bin at the end of our driveway. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets that muffled the world. Each step I took crunched softly, a tiny, solitary noise in the quiet night. That's when I noticed he was gone from his porch. At first, relief washed over me. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. But then, an unsettling feeling wrapped around my chest like ice. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, charged, like the hollow itself had shifted. And then I saw it. Footprints in the freshly fallen snow, starting at his house and moving toward mine. They were uneven, heavy, and slightly too long, with a width that didn't match any shoe I'd seen in the hollow. What terrified me most was that the snow on top of them had begun to melt slightly, as if the prints were still warm. I froze, my own footprints swallowed by panic, staring at the trail that led directly toward me. Each footstep seemed to echo in the silence, a soundless drum in the back of my mind. I could see where the prints ended, just feet from where I stood. And then, nothing. No one there. Not a shadow. Not a hint of movement. My heart hammered. So hard I was sure the entire hollow could hear it. I wanted to run, to call out, to do something, anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I stayed there, the cold snow melting beneath my boots, the footprints staring back at me like the hollow had somehow drawn them into existence. I blinked, and the prints were gone. just the snow, untouched again. I never spoke of it, not to anyone, because how could I? They'd have thought I was joking, or worse, insane. Days passed, and the man never spoke to anyone. He never went anywhere. Folks in the hollow whispered about him in passing, quietly, eyes darting toward the Carson house when they mentioned his name. Some said he was a recluse, a hermit who had simply come down from the hills for the winter. Others remembered the old stories that the last Carson had died in a terrible winter storm nearly a decade before. But nobody had ever lived in that house since, or at least nobody living among the rest of us. I tried to forget him. I tried to tell myself that I'd imagined the footprints, that it was a trick of the snow, the night, my mind. But the memory stayed with me. Every time the wind howled through the trees, I felt the same prickle on the back of my neck. Every time I walked past the Carson house, I found myself glancing up, expecting to see him on the porch. And then, a week later, the house was empty again. Doors wide open, frost covering the windows like nothing had lived there in years. The neighbors murmured that it had been abandoned, that there was no one inside. But I knew it had been him. The hollow had always felt protective, safe, a place where neighbors looked out for each other. But that house was a void, a pocket of something older, something colder than the December snow. I saw the footprints in my mind every time I tried to sleep, a phantom path leading from a house that shouldn't have been lived in to the very threshold of my own. Every Christmas since, I catch glimpses of someone standing there. Not quite the man, not quite human in the way my memory recalls, but something that wears the shape of him, framed in the faint glow of the snow on his porch. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and think I hear the crunch of heavy boots on my driveway, though the snow has long since frozen over. Sometimes I step outside, daring myself to see, and for a heartbeat I swear I feel the eyes on me, unmoving, unblinking, unrelenting. The hollow seems quieter on those nights, as if holding its breath along with me. The strangest part is how it feels familiar, almost comfortable. A presence that belongs, though it should not. Over the years, people have moved in and out of the Carson house, or at least they say they have. But I know the truth. I know that every year, when the lanterns glow and the wood smoke drifts, someone, something, stands there, watching, waiting. I can't explain it. Not really, because explanations don't belong here. There's no logic. In the hollow's deepest corners, only patterns, repeated gestures, the soft, terrible consistency of something that shouldn't exist and yet does. Sometimes I imagine confronting it, stepping onto the porch myself, asking what it wants. But I know better. You don't invite the hollow's ghosts to conversation. You don't reach out to what refuses life. You watch quietly as the snow falls, as the lanterns flicker, as the world goes on around you, and you hope that whatever it is stays on the porch, stays where it belongs. But deep down, I know that it won't. Some nights, when the wind shifts just right, I feel it move closer, feel the cold press through the cabin walls and under my door. And all I can do is remember the footprints, still warm, leading to me in the snow, and shiver. I've lived on the dead-end road all my life. I've seen the familiar faces come and go, children grow up and move away, winters turn into Christmases, one after another. And still, every year, without fail, I see someone on that porch, not moving, not breathing, just watching. I can't say if it's the same man, or something that took his shape, or if it's even alive in the sense that you and I are. But I know that he, or it, never leaves. And some nights, when I step outside to throw away the trash, Snow falling in thick, silent sheets, I notice the footprints again, leading from the Carson house to my own, stopping just feet from where I stand. And still, no one is there. I can't tell you why I stay. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe fear, maybe the stubborn hope that if I just ignore it long enough, it will go away. But every Christmas Eve, I see him or her or it. And every Christmas Eve, I feel the same hollow dread settle in my chest. Because the thing about the hollow is this: some presences don't need doors, don't need windows, don't need warmth or life. Some presences just exist, and they watch, and the snow remembers their footsteps long after the rest of us have gone inside. And in this hollow, that is more than enough. Even now, decades later, when I drive past the Carson house, its windows black and empty, I still slow down, still glance toward the porch, still feel the cold seep through me, because I know, deep down I can feel it, that someone will be standing there this Christmas Eve, watching, waiting, and nothing I do can stop it. I remember the first time I noticed Mrs. Klein's house acting wrong. She'd always been the sweet, peppermint-bred woman of our little Appalachian holler, the one whose kitchen smelled like sugar and cinnamon no matter the season. But after her husband died, something in her changed. Folks tried to check on her, left casseroles on her porch, rang her doorbell with friendly smiles, but she started keeping to herself. Windows stayed curtained, the porch swing never creaked. By mid-December, she was a shadow of the woman who'd once handed every kid in the neighborhood a loaf of her peppermint bread with a wink. That Christmas, I first noticed the second-floor window. Not the kind of warm yellow glow of a lamp, not the dancing orange of a fireplace, but a cold, red flicker. It pulsed like a weak heartbeat, low and irregular, and every night around midnight it started. I asked neighbors if they saw it, and they either shook their heads or whispered that they did but didn't want to talk about it. The first few nights I thought it was just a trick of the snow reflecting the street light, maybe the moon catching something on the curtains. But one night, I stayed out long enough to watch it. The snow had fallen thick, muffling everything, and there it was, red light, creeping along the edges of the window frame, pulsing slow, deliberate, almost aware. I felt the hair on my neck rise. I thought about the stories old-timers whispered about that stretch of road. Folks vanishing in the woods, sudden cold spots in cabins, the kind of things you laughed off when you were younger. I was no longer laughing. I had a plate of cookies in my hand the night I decided to go over. Snow crunched under my boots, the quiet so complete I could hear my own heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I knocked once, twice, 3 times, but nothing. The door was cracked open, just a sliver, and the smell hit me immediately. Not the peppermint and flour I remembered, but a hollow, biting cold that seemed to come from the house itself. Like it was breathing out winter, deeper and sharper than anything outside. I hesitated, unsure if I should call the sheriff first, but curiosity and a sense of dread mingled in my chest and pushed me forward. "Mrs. Klein?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the empty house. A soft shuffle answered me from above. I froze. The sound was careful, deliberate, scraping along the floorboards like someone or something was moving just out of sight. I climbed the stairs slowly, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. Each step felt wrong, as if the house didn't want me there. The hallway stretched ahead, shadowed and cold, and the second-floor window at the end was dark, but for that red flicker, pressing against the curtains like it was alive. I reached the bedroom door. The red light wasn't contained. It had begun spilling from the edges of the door frame, seeping into the hallway like liquid fire. I remember thinking, in the way you think in sudden fear, that I should turn around, run back downstairs, never speak of this. But something compelled me to push the door open, slowly, inch by inch, careful not to let it know I was there. The room was empty, completely empty. The bed, the dresser, even the smallest scrap of her belongings were gone. The walls themselves seemed to be coated in frost, delicate filigree of ice creeping along every surface, catching the red light and turning it into a sinister glow. The window, the source of the light, stood like a sentinel, casting the crimson pulse over the street below. I stepped inside, careful not to make a sound. The frost crunched under my boots. My breath hung in the air, mixing with the unnatural cold. And then I realized it wasn't just light, it was watching me. The pulse seemed to follow my movements, slipping along the walls like it had its own intent. I called her name again, but only silence answered. Not the kind of silence you can wait out, but the oppressive, suffocating quiet of something waiting, patient and alien. I felt my skin crawl, my stomach knot, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move behind the light, something thin, elongated, but I couldn't be sure. The moment passed, and the pulse kept flickering, relentless, hypnotic, impossible. I left then, stepping down the stairs with my heart pounding, trying not to look back. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the world pale and clean, but the cold clung to me like a living thing. I turned onto the road, and that's when I noticed the frost on the railing, the thin, perfect layer that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just cold, it was a cold that didn't belong in the natural world. The next morning, the neighborhood was blocked off by sheriff's trucks. The road was cordoned, yellow tape fluttering in the icy wind. I pushed past cautiously and saw them, Mrs. Klein, frozen in her backyard, her body stiff and pale as though winter itself had reached into the earth and pulled her from the living. They said she'd been gone for days. Days. But what unnerved me most wasn't her death. It was the way the snow lay undisturbed around her, not a footprint except hers, the way the frost on the house looked fresh, like it had been waiting for someone to notice. And the window? The red light still flickered that night, just as it had before. Nobody could explain it, not the sheriff, not the neighbors, not even the old-timers who claimed to know the forest better than anyone. They just shook their heads and said, "Some things you don't want to understand." I've driven past that house countless times since then, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the cold, a reflection, something explainable. But the red light, it doesn't obey logic. It pulses at the same time every night, slipping between the boards of that empty second-floor window like it's alive, keeping watch over the street, over us. I've wondered if it's her, somehow, her spirit, her grief made tangible in the only way it could manifest after being swallowed by winter. Or if it's something older, something that waited for a woman alone in her house to take shape and then stayed. Neighbors move in and out, snowstorms come and go, but the house never changes. The porch swing remains still. The footsteps are never heard, and every night around midnight, the red light flickers as if marking time, as if counting something no one wants to know. Sometimes, when the wind is quiet and the snow muffles everything else, I swear I can hear a soft shuffle from that second floor, patient, deliberate, like a heartbeat behind the walls. And I think about Mrs. Klein, about that cold that could claim her without struggle, and I can't shake the image of that empty room, frost crawling along the walls, the red light pulsing, waiting, watching. I haven't gone back to the house. Not alone. I keep telling myself it's safer that way, that curiosity won't lead anywhere good. But I know better. I see the glow from my window sometimes, far off in the distance, red against the white snow, and I wonder who or what is keeping watch tonight, and if the next time I pass, I'll find it waiting for me. The forest doesn't care about our lives, and neither, I think, does that house. It's patient, it's waiting, and it always will be. The first time I heard her, I thought I was dreaming. It was one of those bone-cold Appalachian nights where the wind slips through the seams of the house, no matter how many towels you stuff under the doors. I'd gone to bed early, had a space heater humming beside me, and must have been half asleep when the sound drifted in. Soft, thin, almost like humming at first. Then the words shaped themselves, trembling through the dark. Silent night, holy night. It wasn't the singing itself that woke me. It was the way her voice quivered, like each note hurt to release. When I opened my eyes, I could tell it wasn't coming from the road or any of the houses down the hill. It was right outside my bedroom window. I lay there for a moment, breathing shallow, wondering if maybe it was a radio someone left on. But the voice, it sounded too close, too cold. I finally pushed myself up, peeled back the curtain with 2 fingers. She stood by the fence, still as the frozen air around her. A woman, thin, wrapped in a knitted shawl that looked like it belonged in an old family trunk. Her head was bowed, chin tucked into her chest, and long strands of dark hair hung stiff around her like icicles. The whole scene didn't feel real at first, like I was watching someone else's memory spill into mine. Her singing barely held together. Every word was a whisper stretched out too long, like her breath wasn't strong enough to carry it. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Something about the way she stood there. Too heavy, too deliberate, like she wasn't waiting for someone to notice. She already knew I had. I blinked, and she stopped singing. The silence pressed against the window so suddenly it felt physical. But when I looked harder, she was still there, only now she wasn't moving at all. Not her chest, not her head, not anything. It took me way too long to realize I was shivering, and not from the cold. When I finally found the courage to move, I grabbed my coat, went to the front door, and stepped outside, expecting to see her still standing there by the fence. But the yard was empty. The snow was untouched, smooth, unbroken, like she'd never been there. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little groan of the house, every shift of the wind, put me right back on edge. And even though I tried to convince myself it was fatigue or maybe even some trick of moonlight, I knew what I'd seen, or at least what I believed I had. Because people don't just disappear without leaving anything behind, not even footprints. The next night, I told myself I'd go to bed early again, pretend nothing happened, pretend my mind was playing games with the dark. But sometime after 2, the singing started again. Only this time I didn't hear the beginning. I woke up in the middle of it, the words drifting through the wall as if she'd been standing there singing for hours. Sleep in heavenly peace. I didn't want to look, but I did. She was there again, same shawl, same bowed head. But something was different. The singing was louder, louder than her lips should have been able to make. And as I stared, trying to figure out if it was some kind of echo of the snow of the house, she lifted her head, slowly, like her neck had frozen in place and was cracking apart piece by piece as she tilted it upward. Her eyes were white, not milky like cataracts, white like frost, like they'd frozen from the inside out. No pupils, no shine, just 2 dead, winter-bleached orbs staring straight at me. Her lips moved only the slightest bit, barely parting, but the song poured out of her like someone was pushing the sound through her, like she was a broken instrument, still being forced to play. I stumbled back from the window, knocking over a lamp. By the time the bulb stopped swinging, the singing had cut off again. When I looked back out, she was gone. Again. The next morning, I went to see my neighbor, old Mr. Tooley. He'd lived on this ridge longer than most graves in the small hillside cemetery. I figured if anyone had seen someone walking around in the snow in the middle of the night, it'd be him. He was chopping kindling when I walked up. I told him everything, every detail, expecting him to laugh or blame whiskey or tell me it was just some late-night churchgoer. But his face went pale, blood-drained pale. "Don't fool about with that," he said, voice low. "You keep your curtains closed, hear me?" I asked him who she was. He didn't want to answer. I could tell. He kept shaking his head like he wished I'd never brought it up. Finally, he pointed toward the line of trees behind our houses. There was a woman back in '75. Folks said she wandered too deep into the woods trying to take a shortcut home. Snowstorm rolled in overnight. They found her 3 days later, froze stiff under a pine. Shawl still around her shoulders, just like you said. I waited. I could feel the rest coming. "Tooley, what happened after that?" He swallowed. "People said she knocked on houses before the storm got bad, looking for help, but nobody answered. Not a damn soul. And, well, word is, she remembers who ignored her. She don't bother the ones who opened their doors back then, only the ones who shut her out." I tried to laugh, but it stuck in my throat. "That doesn't make sense. I wasn't even alive then." "No," he said quietly. "But folks passed down their land, their homes, their mistakes." I didn't like the way he said mistakes, like a curse woven into wood and nails. That night I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I waited downstairs with every light on. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m. ticked by, then 2, and then singing. Not outside, inside. The voice was faint, just a trembling hum, coming from somewhere in the hallway near my bedroom. I froze, listening. The house was dead still around me, but the voice kept threading through the air like it was searching every corner for me. I don't remember standing. I don't remember picking up the fireplace poker. All I remember is the sound. Closer, softer, like it was brushing past the walls. I crept toward the stairs, heart beating so hard it felt like it might shake the boards loose. And as I stepped into the hallway, I saw the shape. The woman stood at the far end, her back facing me. Her shawl hung stiff around her, frost clinging to its threads. Her head twitched, just barely, like she was listening for me. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. I knew, deep in that animal, primal part of myself, that if I moved, she'd turn. So I whispered, "Please, stop." The singing ceased instantly. The house fell so silent I could hear the ice in the gutters settling. And then her head turned, not her body, just her head, slow and wrong, until her frozen eyes locked onto mine. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. Her lips parted a fraction, and a sound slipped out. Something like breath, but colder, thinner. Not a word. More like a question she no longer remembered how to ask. I backed away, step by step, until my heel hit the staircase. When I blinked again, she was gone. The hallway was empty. No footprints, no melted snow, nothing. I moved out 2 days later. I slept on my cousin's couch for weeks. Every Christmas since, I leave town completely. Won't even be in Appalachia if I can help it. But sometimes, on long winter nights when everything is too quiet, I swear I still hear it. A soft, tired voice somewhere outside the window, still singing a song I should have answered. I didn't grow up believing in haunted hollows or mountain legends. Folks in my part of southern Appalachia love to exaggerate a good story, especially when the winter empties out the woods and you can hear every little thing that moves between the bare trees. But I'd lived in my little rental cabin for almost 3 years, without so much as a strange knock or a weird shadow crossing the yard. It sat at the far end of a gravel road that dead-ended against the state forest. No neighbors on either side, just steep slopes, rotting fence posts, and the kind of quiet that falls heavy after dark. A week before Christmas, that quiet shifted. It started with the gifts. The first one showed up on a Monday morning, sitting neatly at the center of my front step like someone had lined it up with a ruler, wrapped in brown paper, tied with red yarn. I didn't think anything of it at first. My closest neighbor was a woman in her 70s named Mrs. Callow, who always left pies or knitted socks on people's porches around the holidays. So I figured it was her. Inside was a wooden snowflake, hand-carved, smooth, a little crude but thoughtful. Something you'd expect to find in an old mountain craft shop. I smiled, set it on my mantle, and went about my day. 2 mornings later, there was another one. Same wrapping, same red yarn. This time it held a black and white photograph of my road, probably taken sometime around the 1950s. You could see the old cars parked crooked along the ditch, kids bundled in heavy wool, a few houses that aren't there anymore. I held it up, studying it for a while, feeling this vague sense of nostalgia for a time I never lived through. Again, I assumed it was from Mrs. Callow or someone else trying to spread some small-town Christmas cheer. But on Thursday morning, everything changed. The third package waited on the step. Same wrapping, same neat placement. But when I tore it open, the cold in my stomach arrived long before the mountain air touched me. Inside was a glossy photograph, not old, not worn, taken this week. It showed me walking the gravel shoulder toward my house, head down, keys in hand, unaware. What stopped me cold wasn't the picture itself, but the angle of it. It was taken from deep in the tree line behind my property, as if the photographer was hiding, watching me through the limbs. There was no way someone could have taken that shot without trespassing, and I sure as hell would have heard them. That night, I locked every door and drew the curtains tight. The woods behind my cabin always looked dense, but under the moonlight they felt endless, like something darker waited between the trunks, listening. On Friday, the fourth gift arrived. I didn't want to touch it. My first instinct was to leave it exactly where it lay, but curiosity has a way of pushing past fear, especially when you've been living alone as long as I had. Inside was a small cassette tape. On it, written in a pencil, were the words, "Christmas Eve." I didn't own a cassette player, but my truck did. I sat there in the driver's seat, breath fogging the air, and slid the tape in. At first there was only static, faint, whispery. Then the static settled into something slower. The sound of breathing, not rushed, not panicked. Just steady, close to the microphone, like the person holding it didn't want to be noticed. A minute passed, then 2. Eventually footsteps began crunching through snow. Slow, careful steps. The person walked a circle. I could tell by how the footsteps shifted from left to right in the stereo. Round and round they went. After the third circle, I recognized the rhythm. I knew that path. They were circling my house. I sat there in the truck long after the tape clicked off. The woods around me felt suddenly awake, like every tree was leaning in, paying attention. That evening, I bought a cheap motion camera from the hardware store in town and mounted it above my front door. I didn't tell anyone, didn't want to sound paranoid or worse, scare myself more than I already was. When I went to bed that night, I left only one lamp on, a small one near the couch. Everything else stayed dark. I lay awake listening to the wind scraping dead branches against the siding and telling myself that the person was probably some weirdo playing a prank. Teenagers, maybe. Someone bored. But at 3:17 a.m. the camera went off. The motion alert popped onto my phone. My mouth went dry. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to see what it captured. But I opened the footage anyway. The video began with the porch empty, just the dim wash of moonlight across the boards. Snowflakes drifted sideways in the wind, catching the camera's infrared like drifting ash. Then, from the left edge of the frame, a tall figure stepped into view. It wasn't the height that bothered me. It was the posture. The person stood slouched, shoulders pulled forward unnaturally. Their head hung low, tilted so far down it almost looked like they were staring through the cracks in the decking boards, listening to something beneath the house. They didn't look at the camera. They didn't look at the door. They just leaned, too long, too slow, and set a small wrapped gift on the step. Then, without standing fully upright, the figure lowered itself onto hands and knees and crawled off the porch. Crawled, not walked. Its limbs moved with this unnatural, spider-like rhythm as it slipped back into the trees. I watched the video 10, 20 times. My heart never slowed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally hit the ridge, I opened the door just enough to look outside. The gift sat waiting in the cold. Same brown paper, same red yarn. I closed the door again, locked it, and sat on the floor until the sun rose fully. That afternoon, I called my landlord, made up a story about needing to move closer to work, and packed everything I could, shove into my truck. I didn't open that last package. I didn't look back when I pulled down the gravel road and left the cabin behind. For a long time, I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd escaped whatever strange mountain ritual or sick game someone had been playing. But 2 days later, Christmas Eve, I stopped to fuel up at a small station outside of Johnson City. Snow had started up again, heavy flakes drifting across the parking lot. When I stepped back outside, something sat on top of my truck hood, wrapped in brown paper, tied with red yarn. My stomach dropped. I spun in a slow circle, scanning the tree line beyond the lot, the pumps, the empty road. No one was near. No footsteps in the snow leading to my truck. No cars pulling away. It was just there, waiting. I didn't touch it. I got back in, locked the doors, and drove off so fast I nearly slid into a ditch. The package tumbled off the hood and disappeared behind me on the road. I didn't stop until I reached my sister's house in Knoxville. Told her I'd gotten off work early and wanted to spend the holidays with family. She didn't question it, just hugged me and made a joke about finally getting me out of that creepy cabin. That night, after everyone went to bed, I lay awake listening to the wind. The house wasn't isolated like the cabin. There were neighbors, streetlights, fences. But still, the quiet pressed in around me the same way. Like the calm before something chooses to make itself known. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard something on the porch, a single step, then another. Slow, too slow. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the ceiling, afraid to move. A soft scraping sound followed, like something being set down gently. Then the footsteps retreated. No crawls this time, just soft crunches fading down the walkway. In the morning, there was nothing on the porch. No package, no tracks, no sign at all that anything had approached the house. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Nerves messing with me after everything that had happened. But as I helped my sister bring in firewood that afternoon, I noticed something in the corner of the living room window. At first glance, it looked like a smudge. But when I got closer, my chest tightened. Someone had pressed their fingers to the glass. 5 long prints, perfectly spaced. Too long to be normal. They formed a faint hand shape, smeared slightly downward like whoever left them had been leaning close, staring inside for a long time. My sister saw the look on my face and asked what was wrong, but I told her it was nothing. Wiped the prints away when she wasn't looking. It's been months now. I moved again and again, always further from the mountains, further from the tree-choked hollows and the long stretches of road that disappear between ridges. I live in a small apartment now, 3rd floor, no woods for miles. But sometimes, when the nights turn cold and the wind slides beneath the window frames, I swear I hear it. That slow, steady breathing from the cassette, right outside the glass. And every Christmas season, without fail, a package appears somewhere I can't ignore. On my doormat, on the stairwell landing, even once inside my mailbox, though no one but the postal worker has a key. Same brown paper, same red yarn. I still don't open them. I don't think I want to know what's inside, because whatever started leaving those gifts, it never stopped. It just learned how to follow. When I first came to the Hollow, I thought the warnings were just old folks' tales, the kind they whisper over coffee and corn whiskey during long winter nights. They say the colder it gets, the more the old mountain spirits stir, but I was from the city and laughed at it, thinking isolation was all about quiet snow and starry skies. The cabin I rented sat at the edge of the woods, right next to a man named Earl. He was an old, thin man, hunched and wiry, always on his porch in a rocking chair. No matter the weather, day or night, summer or winter, he'd sit facing the road, arms folded, eyes locked on the winding stretch of snow that disappeared into the pines. There was something about him that made your skin crawl without reason, a stiffness in his posture, like he was waiting for something nobody else could see. I first noticed it on a cold December morning. The snow had been falling steadily for 2 days, coating the road and burying the edges of the forest in white. I was hauling firewood into my cabin when I saw Earl sitting in his chair, staring down the road, jaw tight, fingers clenched on the armrests. I waved, thinking he might nod or offer a word of greeting, but he didn't even blink, just kept staring. It was as though he expected something terrible to come walking up from the woods. I tried not to think about it, chalking it up to his age, the loneliness, the winter. But when night came, I noticed something off about the shadows in the forest. They seemed heavier, more defined, as if something beyond the trees was aware of my presence. The first time I really felt afraid was the night before Christmas. I'd been reading by the fire, the wind rattling the shutters, the snow muffling every sound outside. When I looked out the window, I noticed Earl wasn't on his porch. My chest tightened. Something in me told me to check to make sure he was all right, though I couldn't explain why. I stepped out into the cold, boots crunching in the snow, and saw him standing in the middle of the road, completely still. His eyes were fixed on the far end of the driveway, the tree line heavy with dark pine shadows. I called his name, and he turned slowly, his face pale, eyes wide, like he'd seen something impossible. He whispered then, just low enough for me to hear, "Never answer knocks after midnight. Not around Christmas. And don't acknowledge anything standing at the far end of the road." His voice was shaky, but there was a weight to it, a certainty that made the hairs on my arm stand on end. "It's not a person," he said, his lips trembling. "It just looks like one, until it gets close." I tried to ask him what he meant, but he shook his head and went back to the porch, rocking in silence as if nothing had happened. I slept that night with the fire burning high, ears straining for the creak of branches or the scrape of snow against the cabin. 2 nights later, I heard it. Knocking, soft and deliberate, like someone testing the door. I froze, heart hammering. Then came the dragging of feet across the porch, slow and patient, almost calculated. I pressed my face to the window and saw it, a shape at the far end of the driveway, too thin, too still. It didn't move like a person. Its limbs hung as in ways that seemed wrong, as though gravity had forgotten them, or maybe it was just the angle of the snow and darkness. I didn't breathe. I just watched, my body rooted to the floor. It stood there, unblinking, as if it knew I was watching. I wanted to call out, to run, but Earl's warning echoed in my head. Something about its posture, the way it held itself, was impossible. And then, as if it had felt my gaze, it shifted ever so slightly. Not a step, just the tiniest movement, and my stomach turned cold. I knew, without knowing how, that if I acknowledged it, it would come closer. And so I stayed still, every muscle coiled like a spring, praying it would vanish. By morning, the snow had erased most of the tracks, but I could still see faint, long impressions near the end of the driveway. They weren't footprints, not like anything a human wore, but they weren't deer tracks either. I spent the day inside, the cabin feeling smaller and tighter than ever. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. And when I looked toward Earl's cabin, it was empty. No smoke from his chimney, no sign he'd been there. It was like he had vanished into the white. I don't know how long I stayed there after that. Days felt like weeks. The forest seemed alive in ways I couldn't explain. The wind carried whispers I couldn't place. The snow sometimes shifted in patterns, like someone or something had been pacing just beyond the edge of the woods. On a few nights, I would wake to the sound of scraping, soft but insistent, and each time I looked out the window, there was a figure at the end of the driveway. Always the same, always unmoving. I never tried to speak to it. I didn't dare. The shape didn't have a face, not really. Just the impression of one, like a dark smear against the snow. Sometimes I swore I saw it tilt its head, like it was studying me, waiting for me to slip up. Earl never returned. I saw his truck gone one morning, and after that, there was nothing but silence from his cabin. The locals I spoke to later said he'd probably moved on, or maybe he finally gave in to whatever he'd been watching for all those winters. I wanted to leave, and I did, a week after the first knocking. But even now, years later, I can feel it when I'm in a quiet place. That sensation of being watched. That impossibly patient awareness of something just out of reach. I never told anyone what I saw. Most would call me crazy. But I know the Hollow keeps its secrets, and some of them are waiting for winter, waiting for the snow to fall deep and the nights to stretch long. The last night I was there, I sat in my cabin, staring at the empty road, listening to the forest breathe. The wind had a voice then, and it wasn't wind at all. I heard footsteps again, slow and dragging, circling my cabin in the dark. I didn't look. I couldn't. I had learned to listen instead, counting each pause, each breath, each tiny shift in the night. Then came the softest knock I've ever heard, almost polite, patient, deliberate. I didn't answer. I never moved. And when the knocking stopped, the dragging continued, fading into the snow. I packed my things the next morning and left the Hollow. I told myself I was done, that I would never come back. But the memory of those nights follows me. I can still picture the thin, impossible figure at the end of the driveway. Still hear the wind, shaped like whispers, warning me not to answer, not to look, not to invite it closer. I've tried to explain it to myself rationally. Sleep deprivation, the isolation, the cold. But nothing fits. Even in the city, When snow falls and the wind whistles through the streets, I feel it. That same patient watching, that impossible stillness, and the lingering sense that some things in the mountains don't just fade away. They wait, and they remember. I think about Earl sometimes. I think about the way he moved, the way he spoke, and the way he understood something that I never could. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet except for the wind, I swear I can hear the dragging again, soft on my own porch, testing whether I'll answer. I've lived in this valley all my life, in a town so small you can drive through it in under 5 minutes. Yet every winter, one thing always drew my attention: the old white house on the hill. It's perched just beyond the last row of pines, the kind of place people used to say holds grudges, and I'd always nodded along without really believing it. But come December, when the snow lays thick and the night stretches longer than a man's patience, I swear you could hear music coming from inside that house. Soft, tinkling, old-fashioned Christmas carols, like someone had cranked up a scratchy record in a room long emptied of furniture. It was never the jolly kind, though. The songs had this odd, almost mournful warble, as if they were being pulled through a dream and spat back into the night. I used to listen from the tree line, hugging the cold bark, pretending I wasn't curious. I wasn't pretending for long. One night, Christmas Eve, I found myself alone and restless. Snow had fallen thick enough to hush the usual hum of the valley, muffling the river and the distant barking dogs, and I felt this foolish bravery stir in me, the kind that's less about courage and more about ignorance. I wrapped myself in a wool coat, stuffed my hands into mittens, and started the trek up the hill. The path wasn't maintained. It was more a memory of a path than a trail. But I followed it anyway, boots crunching, lungs burning, heart hammering, not just from the climb, but from the sound I was chasing. That faint, tinny melody hovered over the slope, so soft I wondered if it was only in my head. But it wasn't. I could hear it, the notes twined with the whistle of the wind and the snap of ice-laden branches, growing slightly louder as I drew nearer. By the time I reached the base of the hill where the house finally broke the skyline, I realized it wasn't coming from a speaker, wasn't coming from anything electrical at all. The building had been abandoned longer than anyone I knew had lived in town. 40 years, maybe more. No windows had glass left in them, the boards sagged under the weight of frost, and the paint had peeled to the bare wood like skin. Yet the music flowed from inside, impossibly intimate, almost as if the walls themselves were singing. It wasn't echoing from the room so much as it was within the house, thrumming in the air, vibrating against my chest. The front door hung slightly ajar, a dark gape in the muted glow of the moon. My first instinct was to stop, to laugh at my own foolishness. But curiosity has a weight all its own, and it pressed me forward. I slipped through the door just as the song swelled, the crackle of vinyl mingling with notes that sounded like they were breaking apart. Inside, the air was damp and sour, the smell of wet wood and something rotting just beneath it. Every step I took on the warped floorboards made the song stutter, but not in a mechanical way. The notes seemed to respond to me, like the house was listening. I didn't dare touch anything. The furniture, what little remained, was coated in decades of dust and frost. The wallpaper peeled in wide, curling sheets, and the staircase to the second floor sagged dangerously in the middle. But the sound, God, the sound, it drew me upward. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a presence. I could feel it in my chest, in the marrow of my bones, the way some people feel a storm before it touches the ground. Halfway up the stairs, the hall stretched before me, shadows pooling in every doorway. That's when I saw them, figures moving just beyond the frames of the rooms, pacing slowly, deliberately, as if they were trapped in some unbroken rhythm. At first, I thought it was another trick of the light, shadows cast by the snow and the moon. But when I stepped closer, the figures froze, their movements suspended mid-step, and the music stopped so suddenly it made my teeth ache. Silence hit like a hand over my mouth, thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare as the black shape stood frozen just beyond reach. Then, almost imperceptibly, the record started again. That same scratchy melody, just as warped and mournful, and a voice slipped through the static. My name, whispered. Not once, but in the pauses between notes, drifting around the hall like a breath. I swear it wasn't my imagination. The sound had a wet, sliding quality, like someone exhaling through a wet cloth. I stumbled back toward the stairs, every instinct screaming to flee, but my boots caught on the warped wood and I nearly went down. The whisper repeated, softer this time, closer, as if it were coming from inside my own skull. I made it to the doorway, heart hammering so violently I could hear it over the music, over the whisper. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the world felt impossibly still. I didn't stop to look back. I ran down the slope, past the gnarled pines, past the empty field where no one had set foot in years. Only when I hit the warmth of my car, the locked doors, the hum of the heater, did I let my knees buckle and sit. I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, not by a person, but by something, a presence that had touched me in that house, something patient and old, waiting in the walls for anyone foolish enough to listen. I've gone back during daylight, of course. Never at night. The house is just a ruin then, peeling and sagging. Nothing but wood and frost and old nails. No music, no shadows, no whispers. People tell me it's my imagination, that my mind is just haunted by old stories and too much time alone in the snow. Maybe they're right, but sometimes, when I walk past the hill on a quiet morning, I swear I can hear a faint melody carried down the slope, barely more than the wind itself. A carol warped with years of abandonment, singing just for me. And that's the worst part, knowing it will be back tonight and the next and every Christmas season. Waiting. Not in the house, not in the town, but somewhere in the spaces between them, just beyond the reach of my understanding. I've never told anyone else about it. You can't, really. People will laugh, or worse, pity you. But I can feel it every year, in the small hours when the snow presses against the windows and the rest of the world is asleep. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think it knows my name before I even hear it. Even now, writing this, I can feel that weight settling in my chest. The memory hasn't faded, hasn't softened. If anything, it's sharper, because I've learned that curiosity isn't just dangerous, it's patient. And so is whatever lives in that old white house on the hill. 40 years empty, they say. But some things aren't gone. They just wait, and they listen. And if you happen to wander close enough on a night like this, they remember your name.